Hey up there. I guess it's just a typical British summer, but I don't know what's happened to the sun. It's been duller than midwinter this last week. But I've been told it's going to brighten up and warm up by the weekend, so fingers crossed. I think it's fair to say that the Royal Enfield brand has sort of got under my skin. I always seem to be gushing about it, because I do think that their bikes offer exceptional value for money. But nothing's perfect, and I've always been very careful to point out the problems with these bikes when they do occur. There are two very similar phrases that are often thrown at me in the comments section or brought to my attention on various Facebook pages, one of which is that I've now become a fan of Royal Enfield motorcycles. I don't disagree with that. In fact, I think I've had a soft spot for Royal Enfield motorcycles for over 30 years. And the other statement or phrase that is often thrown at me is that I'm a Royal Enfield fanboy, which sounds similar, but it doesn't mean the same thing, not in my book anyway. You see, for me, a fan is someone who really loves something and they immerse themselves in, for want of a better word, the culture of that thing. But they're not blind to its faults. They may embrace those faults and just consider them to be part of the experience, or they may do everything they can in their power to rectify those faults, but they don't deny the existence of those faults. A fanboy, however, is a completely different animal. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to a fan, but he or she is very blinkered in their attitude towards that brand. They take, if you like, fandom to the extreme. They won't accept publicly anyway, or admit to any faults or flaws in, their preferred brand. They won't accept that there are any other worthy brands in existence. The brand that they are a fanboy of is the brand, that's it. And they will often make this a bone of contention between themselves and anyone else who has different views. They are, in effect, where motorcycles are concerned, bike snobs. They'll attempt to criticise and bully people who prefer other brands of motorcycle, and they'll do everything in their power to silence or censor other people's views of their preferred brand if it in any way deviates from their rose-tinted perspective. So, with those two definitions in mind, as a Royal Enfield fan, here is my list of things that you should be aware of if you have no experience of Royal Enfield motorcycles and you're thinking of purchasing one. Now, in the world of motorcycle myths and legends, one of the first things you will hear about Royal Enfield motorcycles is that they are cheap garbage. Poor quality motorcycles made from poor quality materials. They've got to be right because they're a lot cheaper than an equivalent or similar European model, and you get what you pay for. That was true 25 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago. That's why I didn't buy one back then, because despite the charm and charisma of the humble Bullet, which was all that was available back then, just a cursory glance of a pre-unit single on a showroom floor would reveal that the bike was being built using outdated machinery and worn-out tooling. Quality of build back then came nowhere near mainstream motorcycle manufacture, and ownership of a Royal Enfield back then was a labour of love. You had to know what you were doing, you had to be prepared to do some very regular spannering to keep it going. But that all changed when Arsha Motors took control. The brand has gone through a slow metamorphosis which probably still hasn't come to fruition fully yet, but I think I can safely say, hand on heart, Royal Enfield is not far behind the best of the best now. So, if Royal Enfield motorcycles are actually pretty good, why the price difference? To understand that price difference, you need to look at various factors. First of all, Royal Enfield's main market is India. The Indian economy is a growing economy, definitely set to become a worldwide force to be reckoned with in the not too distant future, but for the moment, your average man on the street earns a bit less money than your average man in Europe or in the States. He works and he needs transport, and a motorcycle is still a very popular mode of transport for commuting. In fact, motorcycling to work is huge compared to the Western world. So motorcycles built for the Indian market have to be commensurate with the average working man's wage. He has to be able to afford it. And there are two ways of producing a quality motorcycle at an affordable price. One is to produce them in huge volumes. Now, I think the pandemic has probably skewed manufacturing statistics and sales, but only 2 or 3 years ago, Royal Enfield was producing in excess of 800,000 units per year. And just to put that into perspective, the likes of Triumph in the same period were turning out 60 to 70,000 units a year. Now, the pleasant side effects of being able to produce motorcycles in those numbers on a yearly basis is that your production costs plummet exponentially. So does the cost of the parts and raw materials that you buy in. Everything's cheaper because you're buying it in such huge quantities. This in turn allows you to lower your profit margins. You can afford to make less profit because you're selling much more product. And that's where the second part comes in. In order to produce a lot of product, you need a lot of customers. You need to appeal to a much wider customer base. Everybody likes a bargain. People don't like to pay for things that they don't need and things that they don't want. So in a way, Aisha Motors have taken on the manufacturing ethics of Henry Ford in the purest form. You see, what most motorcycle manufacturers are doing these days is that they are chasing the same customers that they had 30 years ago, the same actual guys, which means to a large extent their customer base is constantly shrinking. And so in an attempt to keep those guys coming back for a new bike every 2 or 3 years, they just keep adding more power and more bells and more whistles, and to self-appoint yourself the title of premium brand. This hopefully attracts those guys back to keep buying bikes from you, and it helps you, the manufacturer, to justify the rising cost of your bikes, because each year you're making slightly less bikes, your production costs are rising, and in turn you're having to increase your profit margins in order to make up the deficit. Now, this is an exercise in diminishing returns, when what every manufacturer really needs to be doing is expanding sales and expanding production. And this is where the unique situation that Royal Enfield is in with its domestic market comes into play. Most riders in the Western world are 40-something plus, whereas in India, motorcycle manufacturers have that niche in their customer base, but that customer base actually extends downwards to guys in their early 20s. Indian customers are a shrewd bunch. They want value for money. They want quality, but they don't want to pay for unnecessary frippery. So, like Henry Ford, they put the quality in where it's needed: a good engine, a good electrical system, good brakes, a good chassis and wheels, but cuts back on the frippery. You know, the paintwork is good enough, but it's not excellent. The switchgear, etc., is a bit plasticky, but it stands up to the task and works well long term. Indicators and lighting are basic off-the-shelf components, but they do the job and they go the distance. This means that more people are likely to buy your product, and so instead of contracting, your business expands. This is exactly what Henry Ford did. When he brought the first Model T Ford out, it was over $600, which at the time was cheap, but it was a no-frills motor vehicle for the masses. And so as his customer base expanded, the costs of producing those vehicles came down, and that cheap $600 car within a few short years only cost just over $200. This is exactly the same model that Royal Enfield are pursuing. That's the reason that the bikes are good value for money. So that's the cost differential explained. What else do we routinely get thrown at us to discourage us from looking at buying a Royal Enfield? reliability, and poor cosmetic durability. I now own 3 Royal Enfields. One of them I haven't really had long enough to gauge as far as reliability is concerned, but I've had the Bullet over a year and I've had the Interceptor 650 now over 2 years. And reliability in both cases so far has been excellent. I've not had any issues whatsoever. Okay, I've had 1 or 2 tales through this channel of bikes that have proved to be unreliable, but there's only been a slack handful of those reports, and to be honest, I was never able to get to the bottom of as to whether it was actually a manufacturing fault or user error or negligence. But one thing is clear, and that is that the Indian customer is no fool, and he's very quick to voice his opinions publicly if he thinks something isn't right. And in India that is a big thing because Royal Enfield lives and dies on its domestic reputation. And I'm not tarring everyone with the same brush, but some will complain about the silliest things. I had a guy in the comments section the other day that was complaining that when he took both hands off his handlebars for prolonged periods of time, the bike had a habit of drifting to one side or the other of the road. And as much as I tried to explain to him about the rider's weight distribution and balance on the bike or the camber of the road, he was having none of it. So really, Royal Enfield has had to get its ducks in a row regarding the quality and reliability of the machines. And the same goes for durability. The paintwork might not be quite as premium as that on my Triumphs, but corrosion wise they are no different from the Triumphs, and I've had no issues with either bike. What I have noticed, however, is that in the 2 years between the production of my Interceptor and my Continental GT, Royal Enfield has upped the quality stakes a little bit. The Interceptor was by no means bad with fit and finish, but the new Continental GT is, in my opinion, slightly better, so they are striving to improve all the time. Right, I'm becoming aware that time is passing now and I've still got a few things to cover, so I'll just blitz through them quickly. Short service intervals is something which has been bandied about as a reason for not buying the Interceptor and the Continental GT. It's a load of rubbish. The service intervals are 6,000 miles or 1 year, which is quite respectable, and not 3,000 miles as it used to be with the old classic 500. And this misnomer unfortunately has been further compounded by a certain YouTube channel that reviewed the bike some years ago and was incapable of reading the manual properly, giving out incorrect service intervals. I'm not going to go into it in detail because I don't have time. But whilst we're on the subject of the user manuals or owner handbooks, yeah, they're not the best in the world. The authors of the owner's handbook do have a nasty habit of leaving out important information, like forgetting to mention that you should put your axle nut back on when you've adjusted your chain on the classic 500, or forgetting to mention the oil filter altogether during the oil change procedure on an Interceptor 650, which could conceivably leave some owners going through several years of oil changes without ever changing the filter, which, you know, could lead to problems eventually. That is definitely an area that Royal Enfield needs to look at, along with the microscopic instructions that come with a lot of their accessories that are so small that it's impossible to read them unless you have superhuman vision. And finally, lack of up-to-date engine technology. I think it is safe to say that in some respects these bikes are quite old-fashioned. I don't just mean the classic 500, I'm talking about the Interceptor and the new Continental GT as well. In some areas they do use technology which is considered old-fashioned these days, like traditional lock nut tappets that have to be adjusted yearly or every 6,000 miles. Perversely, the classic 500 has self-adjusting hydraulic tappets, you never have to touch them, but the Interceptor and the Continental GT do have traditional tappets of the type we used to see maybe 40 years ago, but there is a good reason for that, and that is because of the domestic market. Now, this doesn't make the bikes in any way cheaper to produce. In fact, I would wager it adds to the cost of production, because there's more to it than a simple shim and bucket system that we see on most bikes. And although a shim and bucket system will last longer between inspections and adjustment, that comes at a cost. Although there will be some competent DIY mechanics that can tackle this, it's a big job. It takes several hours, and if they do need adjusting, it's not something that you can just twiddle with yourself. You need to go to a dealer and you need to order the correct size shims to make the adjustment, which isn't really very practical in some parts of the Indian market. India is a vast country, and many Royal Enfield owners live in remote areas where the nearest Royal Enfield dealership could be hundreds of miles away. So Royal Enfields need to be serviceable by, best case scenario, the local bike repair guy, or by the owner himself, with simple tools that can be found in the onboard toolkit. Personally, I don't have a problem with that. I see that as a positive, but that is a common theme with most aspects of these motorcycles. Now, I'm sure there are other things that I haven't covered here, there always is, but I've tried to give a rational and reasoned response to most of the negative comments that are uttered about this brand. Like I've said, Royal Enfield are not perfect, they do have the quirks, but bear in mind when you hear these criticisms from people, it's usually people who don't and have never owned a Royal Enfield, or it's from people that dipped the toes in Royal Enfield ownership 20 plus years ago and are just out of date with what this brand is now. One thing is clear, Royal Enfield is upping its game in both quality and reliability on a yearly basis. The Interceptor has been the world's third best selling bike in its category 2 years in a row, and to prove Royal Enfield's faith in this brand, the new models come complete with a 3-year manufacturer's warranty with roadside assistance. The likes of Triumph and BMW, supposedly premium brands, only come with 2, and Triumph only offer roadside assistance for the first year. These are all things that you should take into account if you're considering a Royal Enfield motorcycle. Although I have to admit, warranty claims on the new Royal Enfields is probably something you don't need to worry about too much. Right, I am very conscious of the time. We're coming up to 18 minutes, so I'm not going to go through my usual spiel. I hope you all have a great weekend. If you're out riding, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.